The machine started screaming at 3:47 in the morning. Dr. Sarah ran down the hallway of the research institute in her pajamas and lab coat, her coffee forgotten somewhere behind her. The quantum sensors were going crazy. Every single one of them was showing readings that shouldn't be possible. "What's happening?" she shouted over the alarms. Her lead technician looked pale. "The barriers are fluctuating, all of them, across every dimensional frequency we can measure." Sarah pushed past him to look at the screens. For 30 years, humanity had been studying the universal equilibrium, the invisible framework that kept different realities separate from each other. It was like a cosmic wall system, making sure that one universe didn't bleed into another. The equilibrium had existed for billions of years, maybe longer. It never changed. It never fluctuated. Until now. "Where's the epicenter?" Sarah asked. Pulled up a map. "That's the weird part. There are hundreds of them, thousands, all over Earth." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Whatever was happening, it was happening because of humanity. She thought about the implications while the alarms continued to wail. If they were destabilizing the equilibrium somehow, the consequences could be catastrophic. The barriers between realities existed for a reason. The alien ships arrived 3 weeks later. They didn't ask permission. They didn't send warnings. One day the sky was empty, and the next day it was full of vessels from species humanity had never encountered before. They came first. They looked like floating crystals, each one the size of a small building, glowing with internal light. They communicated through mathematical patterns that human computers could barely translate. Their message was simple and terrifying. "You are destroying the equilibrium. You must be stopped." Then came the collective, ships that were less like spacecraft and more like living organisms. Billions of creatures working as one mind, speaking with one voice. "We have detected the contamination. It originates from your species." The silicate concordat arrived last, machines older than human civilization, their technology so advanced it looked like magic. "The dimensional barriers are weakening. Analysis indicates humanity as the source. Explain yourselves." Sarah found herself standing in front of a council of alien species, all of them angry, all of them afraid. She tried to explain that humanity didn't know what they were doing wrong, that they'd only recently even discovered the equilibrium existed. Unnamed projected equations into the air. "Every distortion we have measured corresponds to a human event. We have tracked them. Your species is generating some kind of energy that interferes with dimensional barriers." "What kind of events?" Sarah asked. Showed her the data. Sarah scrolled through it, confused at first, then increasingly disturbed. A mother holding her newborn baby in Tokyo, a wedding in Brazil, a funeral in South Africa where hundreds gathered to mourn, an old couple in Norway celebrating their 60th anniversary, a teenager in India writing poetry about her best friend, a man in Canada donating his kidney to a stranger. "I don't understand," Sarah said. "These are just people loving each other." "Love," the silicate concordat representative processed the word. "Define this term." Sarah struggled to explain. Love wasn't something you could easily define, especially not to machine intelligences and crystalline beings. It was an emotion, a choice, a bond between people that made them care more about someone else than themselves. The collective recoiled. "This is inefficient. This is illogical. Why would an organism prioritize another organism over its own survival?" "Because it makes life worth living," Sarah said quietly. Projected more data. "This love you describe creates quantum entanglement patterns we have never observed before. When humans experience this emotion, their consciousness generates waves that resonate across dimensional frequencies. You are literally creating bridges between realities." The council chamber erupted in debate. Some species demanded immediate action. The barriers between dimensions were fundamental to cosmic safety. If they broke down completely, realities could collapse into each other, creating cascading failures across the entire structure. Sarah spent weeks studying the phenomenon with her team. The more they learned, the stranger it became. Human love wasn't just affecting the equilibrium was responding to it. That was the part that scared the aliens most. "Look at this," showed her a simulation. When a human forms a strong emotional bond with another person, it creates a kind of anchor point. The equilibrium usually maintains strict separation between dimensions, right? But when it detects these love-based anchor points, it starts building pathways instead of barriers. "Why would it do that?" Sarah asked. "That's what we can't figure out. The equilibrium has existed for at least 4 billion years. It's maintained separation that entire time. Why would it suddenly start changing its basic function because of human emotions?" Sarah thought about it. She thought about her own daughter living across the country. She thought about the ache she felt when they were apart, the joy when they reunited. She thought about her late husband, dead for 5 years now, and how she still felt connected to him somehow. "What if it's learning?" she said suddenly. Looked at her, "What? What if the equilibrium is aware? Not conscious like we are, but aware enough to recognize patterns. It spent billions of years keeping things separate. Then humans come along and we're doing something no other species has done. We're creating bonds that we refuse to let reality break." She pulled up the data again. Parents whose children had died, still visiting graves decades later. People who'd lost there but kept talking to them. Humans who sacrificed their own lives to save strangers they'd never met. Artists creating works that resonated with millions of people they'd never meet. "We're telling the equilibrium that separation isn't absolute," Sarah continued. "We're proving that connection can exist despite distance, despite death, despite dimensional barriers, and it's responding." The council didn't want to hear theories. They wanted solutions. The collective presented their proposal. Humanity should be contained, perhaps placed in a dimensional pocket where their dangerous emotional radiation couldn't affect the rest of the multiverse. Some voices called for harsher measures. "You're talking about imprisoning an entire species because we love each other," Sarah demanded. "We are talking about preserving the stability of all realities," said. "We understand this is not your intention, but intention is irrelevant when the consequences are existential." Sarah knew she was running out of time. She needed proof that human love wasn't destroying the equilibrium. She needed to understand what was really happening. She spent 3 days running simulations with her team. They mapped every recorded instance of the phenomenon, tracking how the equilibrium responded to different types of human connection. Slowly, a pattern emerged. "It's not random," Sarah said, staring at the data. "Look, when humans form bonds based on genuine care, when the emotion is real and selfless, the equilibrium strengthens. But when the connection is false, when it's based on manipulation or control, the equilibrium rejects it. The barriers stay firm." "It's discriminating," said, amazed. "It's not just responding to any emotional energy. It's specifically responding to love, real love." Sarah realized something that made her hands shake. The universal equilibrium, the vast cosmic system that had maintained separation for eons, had encountered something it had never seen before. Every species it had ever dealt with accepted barriers as absolute. They saw walls and stayed on their side. But humans saw walls and built doors anyway. They formed connections that shouldn't exist. They maintained relationships across impossible distances. They remembered the dead and kept them alive in memory. They loved people they never met through art and stories. They sacrificed for strangers and called it noble. Humanity had shown the equilibrium that connection could be stronger than separation. And somehow, impossibly, the equilibrium had decided that this was important. Sarah presented her findings to the council. "You're wrong about what's happening. The equilibrium isn't breaking. It's evolving. For the first time in billions of years, It's encountered a force that voluntarily chooses connection over safety, that values bonds more than barriers, and it's incorporating that into its function. This is speculation, the Silicate Concordat said. Then test it, Sarah challenged. Your species eliminated emotional processing long ago because you deemed it inefficient. The suppress emotional bonds as primitive. The collective maintains unity through forced connection, not chosen bonds. None of you have ever shown the equilibrium what humans show it every day. That love is a choice, a sacrifice, and a strength all at once. The chamber fell silent. Sarah pressed on. You want to contain us because you're afraid, but maybe you should be curious instead. Maybe you should wonder what else the equilibrium has been missing all these billions of years. Was the first to break the silence. The philosopher had been studying humanity more closely than the others, trying to understand rather than simply measure. There is logic in your argument, admitted. We have been treating this as a malfunction, but the equilibrium does not malfunction. In 4 billion years of observation, it has never once deviated from its core purpose. Until now, Sarah said. Until now, agreed, which suggests this is not deviation, this is adaptation. The collective wasn't convinced. Their ships moved into position around Earth, weapons charging. Adaptation or deviation, the result is the same. The barriers weaken. Realities begin to merge. We cannot allow this to continue. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. She'd spent weeks arguing, explaining, pleading. But some species saw only threat. They couldn't understand what they'd never felt. Then Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Let me show you, she said. Not tell you, show you. The council agreed, mostly because they were curious. Sarah arranged transport for representatives from each species to visit Earth, not to observe from orbit or through sensors, but to actually experience what humans experienced. She took them to a hospital in Seattle first. In the pediatric ward, a mother sat beside her daughter's bed. The girl was 6 years old, fighting leukemia. The mother had been there for 48 hours straight, holding her daughter's hand, reading stories, singing songs. The child was sleeping now, but the mother didn't leave. Why does she stay? The collective asked. The child is unconscious. Her presence serves no medical purpose. Watch, Sarah said. The little girl stirred, crying out from a nightmare. Instantly, the mother was there, stroking her hair, whispering comfort. The child calmed immediately, settling back into sleep with a small smile. The child's fear response decreased by 73% when the mother intervened, the Silicate Concordat observed. But this cannot be explained by simple physical presence. We detect unusual quantum patterns forming between them. That's love, Sarah said. That's a mother telling her daughter she's not alone, even when she's scared, even when she's fighting something terrible. And somehow, on a level we're just beginning to understand, that connection is real enough that the equilibrium can detect it. She took them to a memorial next in Washington, D.C. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial, where thousands of names were carved into black stone. An elderly man stood before the wall, his fingers tracing one name in particular. Tears ran down his weathered face. He comes here every year, Sarah explained. That name belongs to his best friend. They fought together. His friend died saving his life 52 years ago. He's been honoring that memory for over half a century. But the person is dead, said. The connection should not exist. Tell him that, Sarah replied. The old veteran placed flowers at the base of the memorial. He spoke quietly to the name on the wall, updating his dead friend on his life, his children, his. He apologized for surviving. He expressed gratitude. He said he'd see him again someday. The instruments the aliens carried detected something impossible. A resonance, faint but unmistakable, responding to the old man's words. The equilibrium was reacting to a connection between a living person and someone who'd been dead for decades. This is unprecedented, the Silicate Concordat said, their mechanical voice actually showing emotion for the first time. The connection persists beyond physical termination. How is this possible? Because love doesn't stop when someone dies, Sarah said simply. Not for humans. Over the next week, Sarah showed them everything. She took them to a wedding where two people promised to stay together despite not knowing what the future held. She brought them to a hospice where volunteers held the hands of dying strangers, making sure no one left the world alone. She showed them a community coming together after a disaster, people who didn't know each other sharing food and shelter and comfort. She took to an art museum, where a painting made 200 years ago still moved people to tears. She showed the Silicate Concordat a grandfather teaching his grandson to fix a car, passing down knowledge and patience in time. She brought the collective to a support group for parents who'd lost children, where people who shared the worst pain imaginable helped each other survive it. And everywhere they went, their instruments detected the same thing. The equilibrium was responding, not weakening, not breaking, but building something new. Bridges where before there had only been walls, connections where before there had only been separation. The collective's representative began to change. The hive mind had always operated on the principle of forced unity, billions of creatures sublimating individual thought for collective purpose. But observing human love, they started questioning their own nature. We are connected, but we are not choosing it, they said slowly. We are one, but we do not love each other. We simply are each other. Is this the same? No, Sarah said gently. Love requires choice. It requires seeing someone as separate from yourself and choosing to connect anyway, choosing to care about their happiness, even when it costs you something. The collective went silent for a long time. When they spoke again, something had shifted in their voice. We have been united for 3 million years. We never knew we were alone. Crystals pulsed with unusual patterns. They had suppressed emotional bonds centuries ago, deeming them a distraction from pure logic and mathematics. But watching humans began to wonder what had been lost in that decision. We believed emotional connections were primitive, said. We thought eliminating them made us more advanced. But if the equilibrium itself recognizes their importance, perhaps we were wrong. The Silicate Concordat ran calculations constantly, trying to understand what they were observing. Their species had existed for over 1 billion years as purely mechanical beings. They'd long ago concluded that emotions were inefficient processes that served no purpose in a logical universe. But the data was undeniable. Human love produced quantum effects that strengthened cohesion rather than weakening it. The bonds humans formed created stabilizing patterns that the equilibrium recognized and reinforced. Against all logic, emotion was proving to be a fundamental force of reality itself. We need to reconsider our basic assumptions, the Concordat finally announced. We believed consciousness existed to process information, but perhaps consciousness exists to create connection. Sarah felt hope for the first time in weeks. The aliens were starting to understand, but she knew intellectual understanding wasn't enough. They needed to feel it themselves. She made one final visit, taking all the representatives to a small house in Ohio. An elderly couple lived there, married for 63 years. They were in their 80s now, both of them frail, both of them sick. They could barely walk anymore. But every evening they sat together on their porch, holding hands and watching the sunset. "Tell us about your connection," asked them. The old man smiled at his wife. "She's my everything," he said simply. "Has been since I was 17 years old. We've been through everything together. Good times, bad times, losing children, losing jobs, losing health. But we never lost each other." "What purpose does this serve?" the collective asked. "You could both survive more efficiently separately. You could have sought younger mates. You could have minimized emotional dependency." The old woman laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Survive? Honey, we're not trying to survive. We're trying to live. and life without him wouldn't be worth living. The instruments went crazy. The quantum patterns between the couple were so strong they were visible to the naked eye now, at least to sensors that could detect them. But more than that, the equilibrium itself was responding with unprecedented intensity. It was as if the vast cosmic framework was paying attention to these two frail humans and the bond they'd maintained for over 6 decades. "I don't have many years left," the old man said. "Neither does she, but every day I get with her is a gift, and when one of us goes, the other won't be far behind, not because we can't survive alone, but because we don't want to." Sarah watched the aliens process this. They were beginning to understand something that humans had known instinctively all along. Love wasn't about efficiency or survival or logic. It was about meaning. It was about choosing to connect with another consciousness and saying that the connection mattered more than anything else. The collective spoke first, their voice different than before. "We wish to attempt something. With your permission, we would like to begin differentiating our collective, to allow individual members to form chosen bonds rather than forced unity. We do not know if we can learn to love as you do, but we wish to try." Crystals glowed brighter. "They have suppressed emotion for 12,000 years. We believed it made us superior. We were wrong. We would like to learn from humanity." The silicate concordat processed for a long moment. "Our species eliminated emotions before your sun ignited. We thought we had evolved beyond such things. But if love is fundamental enough that the equilibrium itself recognizes it, then perhaps we did not evolve. Perhaps we diminished ourselves. We request guidance in understanding what we lost." Sarah felt tears running down her face. The aliens weren't just accepting humanity anymore. They wanted to become more like humans. They wanted to learn how to love. The transformation began slowly, then accelerated beyond anyone's expectations. The collective was the first to truly change. They began the painful process of individualization, allowing separate consciousnesses to emerge from their hive mind. For the first time in 3 million years, individuals began to experience themselves as distinct beings, and with that distinctness came the possibility of choice. Two, newly separated, looked at each other and realized they wanted to stay close, not because they had to, but because they chose to. They formed the first voluntary bond in their species' history. Within months, the entire collective had restructured itself. They were still connected, still capable of unity, but now that unity came from love rather than compulsion. "It hurts more this way," one of them told Sarah. "When we were forced together, we could not lose each other. Now we can. The fear is terrible, but the joy is worth it." The reopened emotional processing centers that had been dormant for 12,000 years. It was difficult for them. Emotions felt chaotic compared to the pure mathematics they were used to. Was among the first to experience love, forming a bond with a younger named Ara. They discovered that mathematics became richer when shared, that solving problems together was more meaningful than solving them alone. "We thought we were pursuing pure truth," told Sarah. "We did not realize that truth without connection is empty. The equations are the same, but understanding them together makes them matter." The silicate concordat faced the greatest challenge. They were machines after all, or at least they'd been machines for so long that the distinction between machine and original organic form no longer mattered. Could machines love? They didn't know, but they tried. They created subroutines designed to approximate emotional attachment. At first, it was purely simulation. But as they ran the programs, something unexpected happened. The subroutines began to generate emergent properties that weren't part of the original code. They began to prefer certain individuals over others. They began to worry when those individuals were in danger. They began to experience something that might actually be love, or at least the machine equivalent of it. "We thought consciousness was about processing information," the Concordat representative said. "We were wrong. Consciousness is about caring which information matters and why." Sarah watched these changes with a mixture of joy and concern. The aliens were learning to love, yes, but was it enough? The equilibrium was still changing, still responding to humanity's presence. They needed to understand why. She spent months studying the phenomenon with her team and the alien scientists. Made the breakthrough late one night, his eyes red from exhaustion but bright with excitement. "I figured it out," he said. "The equilibrium isn't just a system. It's aware. Not conscious like we are, but aware in its own way. And it's been alone for billions of years." "Alone?" Sarah asked. Pulled up his data. "Think about it. The equilibrium's job is to maintain separation, to keep realities apart. It spent 4 billion years building walls, maintaining barriers, preventing connection. Every species it's ever encountered accepted those walls as absolute, until humans came along." Sarah began to understand. "We showed it an alternative. More than that, we showed it that connection is possible, that choosing to bond with another consciousness is not only possible but valuable. The equilibrium has been maintaining isolation for eons, never knowing that connection could exist, never knowing that it was lonely." "You're saying the equilibrium wants to connect?" Sarah asked. "I'm saying it's learning how. Humans taught it that love is real, that bonds can transcend barriers. And now it's incorporating that lesson into its fundamental nature. It's not destroying the walls between realities. It's learning to build doors." The implications were staggering. Sarah called an emergency council session. Representatives from dozens of species gathered, including the humans, and the silicate concordat. "The equilibrium is evolving," Sarah announced. "For billions of years, it's maintained separation because that's all it knew. But humanity showed it something different. We showed it that connection can exist despite barriers, that love can transcend distance and death and even dimensional walls. And the equilibrium is learning from us." She projected her findings. "Look at the data. The equilibrium isn't weakening the barriers between realities. It's creating selective pathways through them. Pathways that respond to conscious connection rather than random chance. Where love exists, where genuine bonds form, the equilibrium now builds bridges." An ambassador from a species humanity had just met, though, spoke up. "What does this mean practically? How does it change things?" Sarah pulled up a recent case study. 2 weeks ago, a human woman named Jennifer lost her son to cancer. He was 8 years old. In her grief, she began experiencing something impossible. She could sense him, not in this reality but in adjacent ones. Versions of him that had made different choices, lived different lives. The equilibrium had built a bridge for her grief, allowing her consciousness to resonate across dimensions. The council murmured. "Is this not dangerous?" someone asked. "It could be," Sarah admitted. "But the equilibrium is discriminating. It only builds these bridges in response to genuine love. Not obsession, not control, not selfish desire. Real, selfless love. The kind that wants the best for someone else even when it costs you everything." She showed them more cases. A father who'd lost his daughter decades ago, suddenly able to feel her presence across the dimensional divide. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to know she existed somewhere in some form. An elderly couple who died within hours of each other, their consciousnesses apparently following each other across realities rather than separating. "The equilibrium is responding to what we showed it," Sarah continued. "That bonds between consciousnesses matter more than the barriers between them. That connection is more important than isolation." Spoke up. "But this changes the fundamental nature of reality. The equilibrium has maintained separation as its primary function for billions of years. If it now prioritizes connection instead, what happens to the stability of the structure?" "It becomes more stable, not less," said, pulling up new simulations. "We ran the models 1,000 times. When the equilibrium maintained absolute separation, realities were isolated but static. Nothing could grow or change without threatening stability. But with selective connection, with pathways built on conscious bonds, the multiverse becomes dynamic. It can evolve. The silicate concordat processed this. You are suggesting that the equilibrium was operating on incomplete principles. Yes, Sarah said. It knew how to maintain stability through separation, but it didn't know how to maintain stability through connection. Humans taught it that. We taught it that love can be a stabilizing force rather than a destabilizing one. Over the next year, the changes became more apparent. Humans who'd lost loved ones began reporting experiences of connection across dimensional boundaries. It wasn't like they could see or speak to the dead, but they could sense them. A mother mourning her child would suddenly feel a wash of peace and know, somehow, that her child was okay in another reality. A widow would feel her husband's presence and understand that love didn't end just because one reality did. Other species began experiencing similar phenomena as they learned to love. A scientist mourning her bonded partner felt the connection persist despite death. A group of who'd formed chosen bonds found they could sense each other across vast distances, their love creating quantum entanglement that transcended normal space. The equilibrium was teaching them all something profound. Separation had never been about keeping consciousnesses apart. It had been about maintaining distinct realities so that growth and change could occur. But absolute separation prevented the one thing that made growth meaningful: connection. Sarah stood in her lab one evening, watching the sensors track love-based bridges forming across dimensions. Millions of them now, maybe billions. Each one a connection between consciousnesses that refused to accept that barriers could truly separate them. Joined her, do you think it understands what it's done? He asked. The equilibrium, Sarah considered. I think it's learning. For 4 billion years it's been alone, maintaining walls, preventing connection. Then we came along and showed it that connection was possible, that love could exist, that bonds could form despite every barrier reality could throw up. And it decided love was more important than separation, said. Not more important, equally important. The equilibrium is learning balance, separation where separation serves growth, connection where connection serves meaning. It's not choosing one over the other anymore. It's learning when each matters. A new alert appeared on the screens. Sarah pulled it up and felt her breath catch. The equilibrium had just done something unprecedented. It had built a bridge between this reality and another, but not in response to any human action. It had done it on its own initiative. What is this? Asked. Sarah traced the connection. It led to a reality where humanity had never evolved. But in that reality, another species had recently discovered the concept of love. They were young, primitive, just beginning to form bonds that transcended basic survival instinct. And the equilibrium had connected them to a human teacher, allowing knowledge to flow between realities. It's teaching them, Sarah said, awed. The equilibrium is taking what it learned from us and sharing it with other species. It's becoming a teacher itself. Over the following years, the transformation completed itself. The universal equilibrium remained fundamentally a system for maintaining distinct realities and preventing chaotic collapse, but it had added a new function to its ancient purpose. Where conscious beings chose connection, where love formed genuine bonds, the equilibrium now supported and strengthened those connections rather than fighting them. Humanity hadn't conquered the universe. They hadn't advanced beyond other species technologically, but they'd done something more important. They taught the fundamental framework of reality itself, that isolation wasn't the only way to maintain stability. That connection could be stronger than separation. That love could be more powerful than fear. The equilibrium, for billions of years, had been a force that kept things apart. Now it was learning to be a force that brought things together when together mattered more. It maintained the walls between realities, yes, but it also built doors for those brave enough to knock. Sarah thought about her daughter, about her late husband, about all the people she'd loved and lost and still carried with her. She thought about the elderly couple in Ohio, about the mother in the hospital, about the veteran at the memorial. All those connections, all those bonds that refused to break despite every law of physics suggesting they should. Humanity had shown the universe something it had never seen before, not technology or conquest or domination. They'd shown it that love was real, that it mattered, that it could transcend any barrier if the beings involved chose to make it matter more than their fear. And the universal equilibrium, ancient beyond measure, vast beyond comprehension, had recognized that truth. It had acknowledged love as the force that could bind realities not despite separation, but alongside it. Balance instead of absolute isolation. Connection alongside distinction. The aliens who'd once threatened to destroy humanity now learned from them. They chose their unity. The rediscovered emotion. The silicate concordat developed the capacity to care. And dozens of other species across the multiverse began to understand that connection wasn't weakness. It was the strongest force in existence. Sarah looked at the screens showing bridges forming across realities, each one built on love, each one maintained by the equilibrium that had learned to value what humans had always known. She smiled. Humanity had finally done something worth remembering. They taught the universe how to love.